out for the sermon, but social distancing and stuff, so I have to stay away from it. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. This morning's gospel is one of my favorites to preach about, because it's the gospel of the four men who bring their friend to Jesus so that he can be healed. And upon reaching Jesus, they realize that they can't get in their house because there are so many people and there's no room. And so they resort to extraordinary measures, and they literally climb up onto the house and take the roof off of the house so that they can get to Jesus Christ. And each and every year I find myself preaching about desire. The desire that these men had in order to help their friend reach Jesus Christ. Yet this morning, and in the light of everything that is facing our world, I have found myself looking at this gospel with a different view. These four men resorted to what some, I'm sure, would call extraordinary measures. Just because the room's full doesn't mean you rip the roof off. And yet, because of their faith, they knew that there was only one way to get to Jesus. Now, some will say that they could have just stood outside and had faith. And as long as they believed, they would be fine and the paralytic would be healed. Μήπως λένε εμείς ότι από την πίστη των ανθρώπων μπορούν να μείνουν έξω και περιμένουν έξω μόνο με τις πίστης τους για να είναι καλά ο άνθρωπος που είναι άρρωστος, ο παραλυτικός. Λέει και σήμερα πολύ και πολύ ότι εμείς εδώ στις εκκλησίες δεν πρέπει να κάνουμε όλα τα χαμός που κάνουμε εμείς, γιατί μόνο να έχουμε πίστη μας δεν θα γίνει τίποτα σε εμάς. Αυτό, οι αγαπητοί μου χριστιανοί, είναι το πιο πολύ και μεγαλύτερη λάθος που υπάρχει. Σήμερα βλέπαμε ότι η φίλη του παραλυτικού ήξερε ότι μόνο με κάτι, μόνο αν κάνανε κάτι έξω από τα σειρά της ζωής τους, έξω από τη σειρά της πίστεως, μόνο με αυτό να γίνει ένα θαύμα του Χριστού. There are many who say now in these days that the church should not resort to these measures of canceling coffee hour, how dare we, of putting out hand sanitizer, of limiting icons. There are many who say that as long as we have our faith, we will be well. How dare we question faith? That, my friends, my dear friends, is the largest incorrect statement that you could make. And it professes not a deep faith in Christ, but a deep arrogance. Today we see four men who could have very well just went and stood outside of the door of the house and waited. And maybe their friend would have made them well. But they wanted to increase their odds of being closer to Jesus. So they resorted to extraordinary measures and they ripped the roof off the house. we too find ourselves these days resorting to extraordinary measures, limiting our physical contact, telling people to stay home, not because we don't believe, but because we know that there is sickness in the world. Science has proven it. There's no question. And we must sometimes resort to extraordinary measures in order to keep ourselves safe and to achieve what we desire. Does staying home and watching through the internet mean we are less faithful? No. Does not kissing an icon mean that we don't believe? No. It means that we resort to extraordinary measures. At the end of the gospel, after Jesus healed the paralytic, the scribes were sitting around, and Jesus said, he questioned them after he had first said, your sins are forgiven. He had not yet healed him. All he had said to the paralytic was, your sins are forgiven. And they questioned, who are you to forgive sins? And he said, so that you know what power I have, watch this. Take up your pallet and go home. And a paralyzed man took up his pallet and went home. And all the people who stood around, after the extraordinary measures were taken, after the man had been forgiven of his sins, and after the man had been healed, all the people who looked around and said, wow, we have never seen such a thing. Today, many of us in our lives have never experienced such a thing as we are experiencing now. And it's easy to write it off or to make jokes or to mock. And yet, we as Christians are not called to do these things, but the things that we are putting in place, these extraordinary measures, are not just for me and for you. They are for one another. The Lord said that the two greatest commandments were, one, to love the Lord our God with all your might and all your soul and all your heart, and number two, to love your neighbor as yourself. When we disregard science that is right in front of us, telling us that disease can be spread easily, telling us to stay home, when we watch what is happening in other parts of the world, we see people dying because healthcare systems are collapsing. And when we choose to be arrogant and ignore these things, that's not faithful. That's faithless. Someone told me a joke this week when I was talking about this, a joke that perhaps in our story that perhaps many of you heard, that there was a faithful man, and his whole city began to flood. And the faithful man went up into his attic, and he was sitting on his roof as the water levels rose. And his neighbor came down the street in a boat and said, come with me, I'll save you. And he goes, God will save me. And the police came by later and said, come, we're evacuating the area. And he goes, I don't need you. My God will save you. Heavenly beastie. And a helicopter, as the water levels were approaching, a helicopter came from above and went to grab him. And he said, please, my God will save me. And he died. And when he went to heaven, he turned to God and he said, why did you allow me to die? And the Lord looked at him and said, I sent you a neighbor, I sent you a police officer, and I sent you a helicopter. Dialogues. The messages that we are being sent by our local and state officials, by our government officials, by our archdiocese, are messages from the Lord, telling us that it is time time to be aware and be cautious and take care of yourselves. We will continue to implement extraordinary measures. We will continue to rip the roof off the house so that we can keep our neighbors safe. And by doing so, we can show them how much we love them. Today, though we are few here, we are few and many on the internet, it does not mean that we are not faithful people to not come to church in a time of worldwide pandemic. In fact, our Holy and Parkdale Synod just said last night, it is in fact an act of love for one another and your neighbor, and not a sin. So my dear friends, as you go and leave this church today, please take these things seriously. God is sending us messages, and it is not to be messed around with. This is not a time for arrogance. This is not a time for, we'll just wait and see how bad it gets. This is a time for extraordinary measures. This is a time to rip the roof off the house so that we can be closer to God. Amen.